Hola, ¿qué tal? Soy Matías Rebolledo y estamos aquí en Kinótico en esta 58a edición del Festival Internacional de Cinema Fantástica de Cataluña, el Festival de Sitges, en este set patrocinado por Repsol en colaboración con la SCAC. Hoy recibimos con toda la energía, we have here with all of energy, Benjamin Phil. How are you doing today?
I'm very well, thank you.
Director of Hammer, one of the documentaries that's been here. So, well, first of all, thank you for your time, and I wanted to ask you, how and when did you start to work on the project?
Through a mutual friend, actually, I was invited in to direct and produce a short documentary to be the precursor of the 2023 Hammer film Dr. Jekyll, which was just meant to be a bit of a recap of where's Hammer been over the last sort of 87 years it was at that time, that was my first sort of welcoming in, I suppose, to the Hammer brand and the Hammer family, and it was a very lovely experience. And actually, without doing that, I wouldn't have moved in. I wouldn't have thought of any of the things that I then wanted to include in a longer form documentary.
Mm-hmm. And when did it take place to get this final form of a documentary? When did you start it to?
So I think we finished Hammer, the short form, which is called Hammer AD 2023. We finished that in the October, and after I completed all of the interviews, I said to Jamie Anderson, my co-producer, I said, well, I think there's a longer form thing here. As if that was a unique thought. I mean, I think other people have thought that too. And so what I initially thought was, actually, I think there's a documentary just about the music of Hammer, because the music in Dr. Jekyll was absolutely stunning. And I went back and revisited some of the other scores and went, oh my God, these are amazing. It turns out that I mean, as well everybody knows, to get a film off the ground means somebody has to pay for it.
Yeah.
And it turns out that not enough other people thought there was just enough in the music to pay for a full feature documentary about the music of Hammer. So I had to broaden it out a little bit. But it was essentially, the December of 2023 when we thought about this. We approached a couple of people, a couple of partners. Hammer then came in and said, yes, this works for us as well. We will partner with you. And I think we'd managed to get full support probably in the May, I think, of 2024. And then the film came out sort of 6 months later. So it was an incredibly fast turnaround, highly efficient process.
What is your, besides professional, what's your personal relationship with Hammer films?
You see, it's interesting because, I mean, typically I don't really have one, which I know sounds like an awful thing to say, given the fact that I've been working with one of the most iconic. I'll say that again in a second, where the glass isn't smashing behind me. It sounds like an awful thing to say, given the fact that I am working with one of the most iconic horror brands of all time. But actually, it gives me a really unique perspective, I think, because I mean, I was born in 1982. And of course, the majority of what people refer to as the classics are of course 50s, 60s. So I just kind of I've slotted in the middle. You don't at the age of 16 you don't tend to look backwards. You tend to look at what's out at the moment. And so I don't necessarily have a personal connection until I made that short documentary where I was interviewing Mark Gatiss, who obviously, very invested in horror. And the things that he was talking about, I thought, God, as a filmmaker, I wanted to understand more about, the people that had made this sort of. I mean, I want to stop short of calling it a revolution of content, but it was definitely an evolution.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to understand more about them, and so I did spend more time reading up on who'd done what, and I watched some interviews and a little bits, and then very quickly I realized that there was an awful lot of stuff about who had made Hammer, what it was, but nobody had really asked the question why. Why did they make Hammer the way that it was? Not just why did they make Hammer. The period of time meant that they were out of work,
Yeah.
and so they just did a job. But actually, without them being who they were and having had the histories that they'd had, they would never have made Hammer. It's not as if James had said, right, we're going to, we're going to make a horror studio, off we go, and they got any Tom, Dick, or Harry in to make it. If they hadn't have selected those exact people at that exact time, it wouldn't have worked, because it was their unique qualities that made Hammer the studio that it was. And so I found that fascinating. Is that why did all those people end up making what they made? It's like Terence Fisher, for instance. Recognized as one of the better, if not the best, Hammer director. He grew up making window dressings for a shop, and you think, you look at his films and you see that. The camera barely moves. It only moves when it absolutely has to. The rest of it plays out. It's like a shop window. And that's obviously reducing it to,
Yeah, of course.
its smallest possible part. There's a lot more going on besides that. But, you can see that progression. There's a linear progression across that. And I found that fascinating. And that's what I wanted to look at. Makeup artist whose parents were in medical sciences. So, well, that's how they got to know how to make wounds. It's stories like that where you think, God, no wonder it worked, because it just had the right people.
Yeah, it's a league of extraordinary men.
Yes, and women, of course.
Of course, yeah. There's a lot of extraordinary people in your documentary, speaking about the Hammer, Mr. Joe Dante, Mr. Landis, which
Yep.
has Mr. Landis seen the documentary and those cuts of his laugh?
He was John Landis, oh my goodness, just the best interview, and we nearly killed him.
Wow.
Well, no, Jamie nearly killed him, I didn't. It was John he is so giving of his time, and he will tell stories that are endless, and he'll assume that everybody he's talking about. And so, I think we'd booked him in for a 45-minute interview, and we were there for an hour and a half, and his wife she was desperate to go out. They were like, right, we are going out in a minute, John. And from the other end of the house, you would just hear, John! and so they'd end up communicating by these sort of shouts. Anyway, yes, so that laugh that sort of we use and reuse, it's just part of who he is. It wasn't, I think, had we have taken it out of context, but he is so bright and so effervescent and so charming, that it feels completely in keeping in order to have kept it in. Whilst that particular laugh, he might have only delivered to us once and we used 3 times. He gave me different laughs that I could have used, throughout the documentary. And if you look at the outtakes at the end, there are so many stories, and we really only included like 3 of them in the outtakes at the end. And honestly, I could have made another documentary just about John Landis, and I definitely want to. So he did get sent the film. Whether he's seen it, of course, is a different matter. But I believe, in fact, I think Jamie, co-producer Jamie Anderson, has been in touch with him. So there's definitely no ill feeling there.
I wanted to ask you, after seeing the film, I was thinking about A24, I was thinking about Blumhouse. Do you think that, in a way, the Hammer history, besides being alive today, but do you think that it's sort of a cautionary tale, in a way?
Cautionary in which way are you thinking?
In a way that times can overcome you and you can lose the touch, in a way?
Yeah, I mean, I think, but let's be realistic about it. I mean, they had a good 20, 25 years there where, they were absolutely on the money. And when you're running any business, the thing that you need to make sure that you do is that you keep the money coming through the door. Otherwise, there is no business. And I think that the deals that were done in the early years of Hammer, when James Carreras was selling films to Universal and going around touting his here's a poster, it exists, we can make this.
It's great.
Have we made it yet, James? No, but it doesn't matter. We'll make it. But he was pre-selling everything, so there was no profit in that. After they made it for what they made it for, but they didn't own anything after that. That's a broad stroke. They did obviously own some elements of it, but the rights management about it would have been really, really complicated. Which meant that by the time that Michael took charge, well, you're barely you're just keeping the wolf from the door. You're just trying to keep the doors open and keep people employed, and so. Yes, there is a cautionary tale, but it's also that times will change. And if you're... Michael freely admits that there are things he could have done differently. But you are a product of your own circumstance. And I think every single one of us is exactly the same. You focus on the things that you think are important. You can't possibly change who you are and think about something else. So you have to celebrate the successes, but also realize that your time is it's a finite window, and it's very rare that anybody will have a success rate of 20 to 25 years. So that should be celebrated. But every dog has its day, and I'm definitely not calling Michael Carreras a dog, although he does have dogged determination, because arguably without Michael Carreras doing everything he did, and yeah, there was some missteps in there for sure, but without him doing everything he did, Hammer as a brand probably wouldn't still be remembered today. It would probably have gone, it probably would have died 10 years prior. And if it wasn't for him, it probably would have ceased to live long in the memory.
Of course. I wanted to ask you about Hammer in terms of its relationship with the British film estate. How is do you think that it would be possible today to have a Hammer Films, a company making only horror films or so-called fantastic films nowadays in the British industry of nowadays?
I mean, Hammer, of course, still exists, under John Graw Studios. Yeah. And John is a massive Hammer fan. If anybody is going to keep that studio alive, it will be John. But in terms of, do you mean sort of in not diversifying away from horror?
And in terms of popularity, being top tier.
I mean, I think if we're looking back to the commercial successes of the 50s and 60s, it's obviously very, very difficult to churn out that much content these days because of how expensive filmmaking is. But arguably, if it's going to happen anywhere, it could well happen in Britain. Certainly the US market is far too expensive to be able to do that at high volume, because also remember they were making it very, very cheaply. Yeah. Or what might be referred to as cost effectively. But it was essentially cheap filmmaking that was then sold to the masses. And I think there's absolutely an opportunity now for somebody to take those risks. We heard at the Oscars a couple of years ago, when $100 million movie won the Oscars, and I forget who it was, somebody called it out and said, yeah, great, $100 million movie won an Oscar. For $100 million, I bloody hope they won an Oscar. But what's happening to the $10 million movies? What's happening to, why are we not hearing about those? And then lo and behold, the next year, surprisingly, a $10 million movie won an Oscar. I never saw that coming. Anyway, but the point is the fact that, now, with some of the efficiencies that the big, bad, scary artificial intelligence can bring, and I know that there are a lot of challenges and a lot of concerns around that, but there's also a lot of efficiencies brought with that in terms of production techniques and the way that we work. Actually, if somebody wanted to do high volume, fast turnaround, cost-effective production right now, well, I mean, the tax incentives in the UK are geared towards that. There are a lot of tax savings to be made by making feature films in the UK right now. And if you've got the money to put into it, I think now is a perfect time to try and revitalize that sort of that method of filmmaking, en masse, if you like, where you have a group of people who are tenacious and they really want to succeed. If you get that right team together, you could do another Hammer turn. Yeah, they'd be different. But I think the market is out there. You've only got to look at Sitges.
Yeah.
Sitges is a remarkable festival where you know anybody who knows anything about horror will turn up, and you've got to look at the way that it's survived. Its legacy is incredible, probably the best in the world. And so when you look at if there is this that survives, then the market is definitely out there.
Of course, I'm sure our industrial audience will love that. We'll love to hear that. Please stay with me for one last question. Vamos ya con la última pregunta, pero os recordamos que las energías de Repsol mueven el Festival de Sitges. Por segundo año, Repsol está presente no solo aportando sus soluciones energéticas, sino también ofreciendo distintas experiencias para que el público lo pase de miedo. I was telling our audience that Repsol, our partner here, is helping us getting people the chills to get frightened around the festival. So I wanted to ask you, what is your very first horror memory in film, in TV? How was that?
It's probably going to the cinema I think it was to see The Ring. And so there was the girl that climbed out of the television.
Yeah.
That was frankly horrific, and will be forever burned in the back of my mind. But the key moment for me, and I think it was The Ring, or it might have been The Grudge, I really can't remember, was the girl in the wardrobe where they pulled back the wardrobe doors and there was a girl, it must have been The Ring, completely sodden, kind of washed out eyes, and just looked like she was dead. I think she probably was dead. That was probably the point. But oh my God, that was one of those moments where there were nightmares for weeks.
Well, Benjamin, thank you for your time.
Thank you so much.
Let's all the best for the film.
Thank you.
Nosotros, ya sabéis, vas a poder ver este documental interesantísimo sobre la Hammer en Filming, y nosotros, ya sabéis, vamos a seguir aquí en Kinótico i en el Festival de Sitges, esta 58a edició del Festival de Cine Fantàstica de Cataluña, en este set patrocinado por Repsol en colaboración con la SAC. Todo lo que ocurra en el festival en kinótico.es, la primera con K, la segunda con C.